Okay.
But I think you pretty much answered them fully. Trying to think
only to some extent, and of course it's easy to minimise what you're talking about on Twitter. You've only got 140 characters. I think you need to look at what SEND really means. There are 4 categories, obviously, of which one is the more physical aspect of it. Those you would need to make very careful adjustments to a lesson for, although some schools are going down the route of fully integrating and involving them in things like wheelchair basketball or things like that. So if a child is coming in a wheelchair, they're actually adapting the whole lesson to accommodate that one child. At other extremes, you might have communication issues. So you just need to know your children really well so that you can actually cater for their needs.
Mm.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Some things are very obvious. I think we have to accept that some things are very obvious, and other things you may become aware of just by being with the children. I can remember one child who was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy during the PE lesson. It hadn't been noticed before school, before this child started school, but he came to my school at 5, and we actually observed him during a PE lesson, and it was very obvious that there were some physical issues, which we then brought the occupational therapist in to have a look at, and it was then that it was diagnosed. So you might actually find issues during a lesson that you notice that nobody else has.
Yeah.
Also, one thing I noticed whenever I was in school, it's a GCSE theory class. There was a student with SEN needs, and she wasn't engaged at all, but the teacher just let her just sit there, and she had her head in the desk, and she didn't really, he spoke to me after the lesson and said that he just left her because he didn't want her to make a disruption within the rest of the lesson, so he just thought it was best to leave her.
Okay, now if that had been a maths or an English lesson, would you expect the same thing to happen?
No.
Okay, so I think from the way you're describing it, it would be as unacceptable in a PE lesson, the way you're describing it, as it would be in any other lesson.
Yes.
You need them to be involved.
I'm just wondering what could have been done, because I know if anything had been said, she's quite a strong personality, so would have not taken it quite well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's very hard to let a child be disengaged from a lesson.
Yeah.
I think you do have to make efforts to find out. You can get the lesson underway, and if you're obviously talking about a theory lesson.
Yeah.
Okay, you get the lesson underway, and then you make an effort to go and talk with the child quietly, and see if there's some reason why they're not engaging.
Okay.
But I wouldn't necessarily deal with it head on, because yes, you might have a disruption to the whole lesson, but make sure you get into the lesson, make sure everybody else is on task and engaged, and then have some time with that one child.
Okay.
So would you kind of take on a role as, if they needed a TA in there but there wasn't the resource for them to have a TA with them, would you get the rest of the class going and then act as a TA with them, work with them as much as you could, and then go back to the full class, or would you just try?
You may well have to. You may well have to. You can't just rely on having a TA there for special needs children, and you will have many whole classes without a TA, and you will have a full range of children to accommodate. So just get to know the children really well, and if you work on the principle of I can rely on some to get on, and then I've got some that I really need to keep a close eye on and support, you're just doing the same sort of thing as you would in a normal classroom.
What would you say, Chris? We had a chat about data 2 weeks ago. From a SEND point of view, what would you say was any key data for teachers to take into account in that respect? Even stating the most obvious ones. Right,
okay. Data is one of those strange ones, isn't it? In that you're going to have achievement data from a range of subjects. Now, you have to work out whether data from maths, say, is going to impact on PE. and your expectation in PE, because it may not. Because a child's not so good at maths doesn't mean they're not going to be good at PE. So I would say avoid making assumptions and get to know the children in your setting. You can perhaps pick up from English their ability to communicate or have an idea of how they can communicate. But again, a lot of PE is likely to be spoken. You're going to have other issues with written English, but then that's a negotiation perhaps with the English department and any other specialist support on the English side of things. So that's where teamwork comes in, I think.
Sorry, I was saying to the students that my own experience when I did my PGCE, I had not done any classroom PE myself other than being taught A-level and going to university. And my mentor in my first placement, one day, many months after me sitting around observing, said, or I said to him about, I think I should start to get involved in terms of leading this lesson, and pretty much got left to my own devices. Now, what I was saying to the students earlier was predominantly a PE teacher's timetable, depending upon where you are, could be predominantly very practical. And the theoretical classroom-based GCSE, A-level, BTEC side of things becomes a smaller part of the timetable due to the nature of the subject. So in that respect, I think that's a real area that I think a lot of the practical stuff can kind of come naturally, or stuff you work on, because a lot of PE people come from like a coaching background, but the classroom stuff doesn't come as naturally, so anything along those lines would be very helpful.
Okay, well I would actually say that a good teacher is a good coach. I don't think there's a significant difference between the teaching style that you might adopt in a practical lesson and the one that you would probably adopt in a theory lesson. You're still going to spot the children who are struggling. You're going to spot the children who are doing really well. You're going to perhaps pick out the ones you want to use as exemplars. It doesn't change as far as I'm concerned. I think a good teacher is actually also a good coach. And the skills of coaching, take them into the classroom and keep your eyes on the children, keep spotting, keep looking out for the evidence that they are disengaged or that actually they're getting on quite well. And if you're seeing a child who normally struggles and they're getting on quite well, what are you going to do? Probably going to praise them. You're going to actually give them some encouragement in a form that they can accept. Because there's another side to this, that sometimes children who had a problem in learning can't take praise. And that's a strange thing to deal with, because you normally expect children to accept praise. And it slightly throws you if they react badly almost to praise. So I think it's a case of finding the right approach for each child.
Sure, yeah, definitely. Okay. What would you say, obviously the code of practice has recently changed. Is there anything that, from a student teacher or a new teacher point of view, to be particularly aware of in that respect?
I think the biggest thing is that behaviour has changed. Behaviour is no longer a category of special needs in its own right. It was up till the summer. It's now looked at as social and emotional and mental health. So social and emotional obviously is a side that you might want to explore, because there may be some background to behaviour issues which you need to understand. In a way, they've almost got rid of behaviour because they want teachers to unpick the reason behind the behaviour, not just to deal with the behaviour as it manifests itself. So if you find a child who's behaving with difficulty, then perhaps that's a point at which you go and find out whether there are social issues or emotional issues that someone else is dealing with. Hopefully you would know that, and hopefully if there were issues, you would actually know if they had mental health issues too. So this goes back to what I said earlier on about knowing your children really well. There will be some, and if you're teaching a secondary school across a wide range of classes, you are bound to come across children who have social, emotional or mental health issues. You may have some who are on the autism spectrum and they may present as having communication issues. that's one of the, you just have to get to know them really well and find the right way to talk to them. If you are struggling with that, though, go and get advice. Be coached yourself by an experienced teacher. But it's all about relationships.
Yeah.
Mm. There's a boy in my school at the moment who's just come into the school and he's on the autism spectrum.
Right.
He likes to be first, like whatever he's doing he likes to go first, and if he doesn't he'll create a big scene. So they obviously are trying to work on it, but PE's like quite a big change for him as well, because obviously he's going into changing rooms, getting changed. It's really a big change from primary school.
Yep.
So I'm inclined just to, at the moment, while he's working on it with his TA, to let him be at the front of the queue, let him go first in games and stuff. Would that be something that you do? Would you allow that to, just while he's settling in and getting to feel comfortable, and then let his TA kind of deal with it, or would you take it upon yourselves to try and?
I think, yes, in this first instance, probably yes, accommodate. That's one way of saying that this child has a place in your school. Having said that, then there may well be times, there may be a point at which you actually think, well, I'll sit down with them all and talk about it, and sit down with the child and talk about it, and find the relationship that somehow there's an accommodation between the child and his peers, really, because they have to accept him too.
Mm.
Because what you don't want is that all the others saying it's not fair, because he's always first. There is some negotiation to be had on that one, but at the same time you have to be sensitive to the needs of that individual child too. You don't get it to the point where that child dominates. I think that's the big thing.
Yeah.
So it's actually finding the balance, finding an accommodation.
Okay.
If you're lucky enough to have a TA in your class, Chris, what would you say represents elements of best practice?
With the TA,
Yes, yeah.
quite simply, I'd say work as a team. And I think use your TA as an extra pair of hands, eyes, whatever. And it's quite often possible for you to say, well, okay, don't see the TA as always with the special needs child. Because actually the TA in your classroom also gives you the flexibility to work with that child or the small group around them, while your TA acts as your eyes with the others. So use it flexibly, use them flexibly, and do some teaching of these special needs children yourself. Don't leave it all to TA. Otherwise, that child never gets the teacher. They can be put to one side with the TA, and then almost, if you're not careful, ignored because you're thinking somebody's dealing with them. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Too often, TAs are seen as the person who does the special needs, whether it's a PE classroom or a mainstream subject classroom. There are other ways of using them, sometimes much more creatively, so that the teacher can be giving time to the child who actually needs the most help.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I worked as a TA last year, and that happened quite a lot. I was often it was assumed that I'd differentiate the work for him as it came, and I'd like kind of make sure everything was communicated for the teacher rather than the other way around.
Okay. There are lots of ways of doing it. I think just be aware of the impact on the child.
Yeah.
You want to have the best possible teaching and learning impact on each child, and if it's you that's going to have the most impact, then organise the class so that you do that. It's an organisation. It's just an organisational thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
And other than getting to know the children really, really well, any other top tips for differentiation?
Right. Okay. I sent you a post that talks about.
Have a look at that.
Yeah. Okay. You've got that. You've got differentiation by outcome. Okay. You know what that is. That's everybody in, and I'll see what you can do. Differentiation by support, and that's perhaps what we've been talking about, using the TA appropriately to support and guide alongside you, or focusing where you're going to be. You might have differentiation by task, so you might actually change the challenge of the task appropriate to each group of children, and actually almost phrase it in terms of, I want to see if you can do this, see if you can do something, and challenge them up. So you're constantly challenging up and using the outcomes, the examples from different groups to explore with others how to have a go at something. You've seen that. I tend to talk about it as know-how with show-how. The children show something, then the others might actually know better how to do it. Well, then have a go. And I think that's almost back to your coaching style, isn't it? It's actually pick out somebody who's doing what you want them to do, or even a little better than you want them to do, and just say, well, you've seen how to do it, have a go. So differentiation by challenge, by expectation, by outcome. It's almost an expectation thing. What are you expecting from them? Do you have a differentiation by expectation? What will your highest achievers think about and be aiming for? What's a good expectation of your lower achievers? What would be a challenge? Goes back to your success criteria again. What would be success for those children? Put the challenge ahead of them and then engage.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah. Fantastic. Any other questions?
No, I don't think so. We can tweet you anyway if we do.
Yes, please do. You know where I am.
Thank you.
The only other one I would say, Chris, which you've touched upon, I know we're talking SEND, but in terms of differentiation, the Ofsted report about the most able children from last year, what's your take on that, and what do you think the approach should be for the most able children in the class?
Right, let's assume you've got a mixed ability class, yes?
Yeah.
And actually, it doesn't really matter in my mind whether you have a mixed ability class or a streamed or setted class, because actually they're all mixed ability. If you have a stream or a set, you still have a mixed ability. You still have an upper group and you have a group at the border. You need to know those children, what they have achieved, and what would be the next step for them to challenge themselves. So it's actually continual challenge. Where's the next step for each of those children? And if you can work on personalized challenge, and actually I haven't touched on that, but if you could actually get to a point where each child knows what they're working on and what they're trying to improve, then each of those children can actually add some energy to the whole process. Your most able children, yes, you do need to challenge them up. It's very easy to under-challenge able children. They're just going to get it anyway, aren't they? So, teachers sometimes think, right, well, they're okay. The ones I worry about are the borderline. I would say keep challenging up, because actually what you're doing by challenging up always is showing the rest what can be achieved. By showing them what can be achieved, you're actually possibly raising the bar for everybody. So I would use them as, let's take an example. A very good an example might be high jump. Let's assume we've got somebody who can high jump 1 meter 40. And actually what you'd like is to see somebody who can high jump 1 meter 45. Well, you put the bar up and you let them have a go at it, and somebody jumps it. And you might then say, well, okay, let's have a look at how they did it. Let's unpick. You might video it. You might look at it in slow motion. You might just unpick everything. And then, okay, having done that, let's look at the little constituent parts that got the child to that point. And everybody have a go. Right, now we've got 5 people, 6 people, 7 people having a go, and they've all achieved it. Now you raise the bar again, 150. What have you got to think about now? And constantly raising the bar all the time. Okay?
Yeah, brilliant. Excellent. Chris, thanks very much for giving up some of your time.
No problem.
Really appreciate it, and
Thank you.
enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, and you too. And don't forget, you know where I am if you want to tweet.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
Thanks, Chris.
Nice talking with you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.